Don't forget to like the video, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to stay updated with our latest stories. Melanie had long settled into the rhythms of her life. At 57, she had been married to Mark for over 3 decades, a marriage that had become a comfortable, predictable existence. They were partners in every sense, supportive, reliable, and deeply familiar. Their conversations were easy, often revolving around work, household projects, and updates from their grown children. It was a good life, or at least it had always seemed to be. That evening, she and Mark were invited to a dinner party at the home of Jeff and Allison, a younger couple they had grown acquainted with through Mark's work. Jeff was one of Mark's colleagues, charismatic, confident, and nearly 15 years younger than Melanie. She had always found him friendly and engaging, though she had never thought much of it. His wife, Allison, was warm, but had a quiet intensity about her that suggested she was constantly on edge. The evening was lively. The wine flowed freely, laughter echoed around the dining room, and conversations wove seamlessly between careers, travel, and mutual acquaintances. Melanie, as always, was poised, laughing at the right moments, chiming in with anecdotes when appropriate. But something felt different. She first noticed it in the way Jeff looked at her. It wasn't the casual politeness of a dinner host, but something else, an intensity that made her skin prickle with awareness. She dismissed it as a trick of the candlelight or perhaps the effects of the wine. Later in the evening, as guests moved around, shifting conversations into smaller groups, Melanie found herself alone with Jeff in the kitchen. He was refilling his glass when he turned to her with a smile, his tone softer than before. "You know, Melanie," he said, swirling the deep red wine in his glass, "I always look forward to seeing you." She tilted her head, surprised. "That's kind of you to say." "I mean it," he continued. "You have this grace about you. I don't know. It's rare." Melanie felt something stir inside her, an unfamiliar flutter, a warmth she hadn't expected. She opened her mouth to respond, but he continued, his voice just a touch lower, as if sharing a secret. "Allison and I," he hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "We're in a rough patch. Marriage is hard, you know." She nodded slowly, uncertain where he was going with this. Jeff sighed, leaning against the counter. "Sometimes I wonder if it's supposed to feel this way, if it's normal to feel disconnected." Melanie knew the feeling well. How often had she and Mark gone through phases of quiet detachment, moments where they felt more like roommates than lovers? But they had always found their way back to each other, hadn't they? "You and Mark," Jeff said, watching her carefully. "You seem solid, steady. I admire that." Melanie smiled, but before she could respond, Jeff reached out, the movement almost instinctive, his fingers grazing her wrist. It was the lightest of touches, brief and seemingly insignificant. And yet it sent a jolt through her, an awareness of herself as a woman, as someone who could still be seen, still be desired. The moment ended as quickly as it had begun. Jeff pulled back as if realizing the weight of what had just happened. "I'm sorry," he murmured, shaking his head with a small, almost embarrassed chuckle. "I didn't mean—" "It's fine," Melanie interrupted, offering him a small, careful smile. "We've all had a bit to drink." But as she rejoined the others, slipping back into the conversation as if nothing had happened, she couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted. It wasn't just Jeff's words or his touch or the way he had looked at her. It was the fact that she had felt something she hadn't felt in years. The dinner party had ended, but its effects lingered. As Melanie and Mark drove home, she stared out of the car window, watching the city lights blur past. Mark was talking about something Jeff's latest project at work, or maybe the wine they had served, but she wasn't listening. Her mind was elsewhere, still caught in the moment when Jeff had touched her wrist, in the way he had looked at her. She had told herself it was nothing, just a brief slip in the flow of the evening. And yet, it wasn't nothing. It had awoken something inside her, something she wasn't sure how to name. As they pulled into their driveway, Mark turned off the engine and looked over at her. "You were quiet tonight," he said. She blinked, forcing a smile. "Just tired." He nodded, accepting her answer without question, then got out of the car. Of course he didn't question it. Mark never questioned much when it came to her. He had long stopped looking too deeply, or maybe she had just become so predictable that he never felt the need to. That night, as she lay in bed beside him, she found herself staring at the ceiling, unable to sleep. Mark's breathing was slow and steady, his body already surrendered to rest. She turned on her side and studied him, the familiar lines of his face, the curve of his shoulders, the slight crease between his brows, even in sleep. This was the man she had built a life with, the one who had always been there. So why did she feel so restless? It wasn't just Jeff, she realized. It wasn't just the way his words had made her feel momentarily seen. It was what it had revealed about herself, how long it had been since she had felt that way at all. When had her marriage become so still? Not bad, not broken, just motionless, like a boat adrift on a quiet lake. The absence of turbulence wasn't necessarily a sign of happiness, was it? The next morning, she went about her routine. As usual, coffee, emails, a quick call with her daughter, a list of errands to run, but everything felt slightly off, as if she were moving through a world that was suddenly a little different than before. At lunch, she found herself scrolling through old photos on her phone, vacations with Mark, anniversaries, candid moments that should have been proof of happiness. And yet, when she looked at them, she didn't feel the rush of nostalgia she expected. She felt detached. That afternoon, she found herself hesitating before texting Mark. She had meant to send him a quick message, something about dinner plans, but her fingers hovered over the keyboard. When was the last time they had exchanged anything beyond logistics? When had their conversations stopped carrying warmth? She thought about Jeff's words from the night before. Sometimes I wonder if it's supposed to feel this way, if it's normal to feel disconnected. Had she been disconnected all this time and simply never noticed? Or worse, had she noticed and just accepted it? Shaking herself from her thoughts, she sent the message. "Melanie, thinking about trying that new place on 5th for dinner. Feel like going out?" Mark, "Busy day, let's just eat at home." She stared at his response for a moment, then locked her phone and set it down. A year ago, she wouldn't have thought twice about it, but today, after last night, it felt heavier. As she stood at the kitchen sink, gazing out at the yard, she knew this wasn't about Jeff. It wasn't about one moment at a dinner party. It was about her marriage. And for the first time, she wasn't sure if it was enough anymore. Melanie told herself that nothing had changed, but deep down, she knew that wasn't true. After the dinner party, after the quiet realization in her kitchen, she started noticing things she had ignored before: the silences between her and Mark, the absence of laughter, The way their conversations felt more like checklists than anything meaningful. It wasn't that they fought. There was no great betrayal, no dramatic rift. It was just distance. A week passed, then another. Mark was busy, as always. Meetings, deadlines, the usual. She told herself it was just life, that every marriage went through phases like this. But she couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental had shifted, not in him, but in her. One evening, as they sat at the dinner table, she watched him. He was scrolling through his phone between bites, answering an email, completely unaware of her gaze. "Mark," she said softly. He looked up, distracted. She hesitated. What was she going to say? I feel like we're slipping away from each other. I don't know if I'm happy anymore. It all felt too big, too sudden. So instead, she said, "Never mind." He nodded and went back to his phone. She pressed her lips together and stared at her plate. Would he even notice if she wasn't here? The thought sent a chill through her. The next day, she found herself thinking about Jeff again. She hated how easily her mind went to him, but it wasn't really about him, was it? It was about the way he had made her feel that night, seen, engaged, awake. She wasn't foolish. She knew that wasn't love. It wasn't even real, just a fleeting moment between two people who understood something unspoken about each other. But still, it had made her realize what was missing. That afternoon, she met Claire for coffee. Claire had been her closest friend for years, the one person she could talk to about almost anything, but even now, sitting across from her, she hesitated. "You're quiet," Claire observed, stirring her latte. "What's going on?" Melanie exhaled slowly. "Do you ever feel like your marriage is just moving forward out of habit? Like neither of you is unhappy enough to leave, but not exactly happy either?" Claire gave her a long, knowing look. "Yes." Melanie's heart sank. She had expected reassurance, some sort of, "Oh no, you're just overthinking it." Instead, Claire's quiet confirmation made it all feel too real. "I think a lot of people feel that way," Claire continued, "but no one wants to say it out loud." Melanie swallowed. "So what do you do? Just live with it?" Claire hesitated, then shrugged. "Some people do. Some people fight for it, and some eventually walk away." The words lingered between them. That night, Melanie lay awake again, staring at the ceiling, listening to Mark's steady breathing beside her. She felt like she was standing at the edge of something, looking down at a life she wasn't sure she wanted anymore. How had they gotten here? And more importantly, was there a way back? The question stayed with her. Was there a way back? For days, it sat at the edge of her mind, creeping into quiet moments when she wasn't distracted by work or the kids. She found herself analyzing every conversation, every interaction with Mark, searching for signs of love, of hope, of something worth saving. But that was the problem, wasn't it? She wanted there to be something to save, but she wasn't sure if there was. One evening, Mark came home late. Again. She was in the kitchen rinsing dishes when she heard the door click shut. "Hey," he called, setting down his bag. "Long day." It was the same line every night. He kissed her on the cheek out of routine, then walked to the fridge. "How was your day?" he asked, his back to her. She hesitated. She could tell him the truth, that she felt like she was drifting, that she didn't know how to reach him anymore, that she had spent half the afternoon wondering if she even wanted to. Instead, she said, "Fine." He nodded, grabbed a drink, and turned on the TV. Just like always. She wiped her hands on a dish towel and watched him. This was their life. Was this enough? The next morning, she sat in her car outside a coffee shop, staring at her phone. Her fingers hovered over Jeff's number. She hadn't saved it, but she had memorized it, which felt just as dangerous. She wasn't naive. She knew this wasn't about him. It was about the feeling he had stirred in her, the reminder that she was still capable of wanting something more. But she also knew that reaching out to him would be a step she couldn't undo. With a sharp inhale, she locked her phone and set it aside. Instead, she texted Mark. "Can we have dinner together tonight, just us?" A few minutes passed before the reply came. "Sure, everything okay?" She didn't know how to answer that. That evening, they sat across from each other in a small restaurant they hadn't visited in years. The conversation was polite, filled with safe topics, work, the kids, the usual. But Melanie wasn't here for small talk. She took a deep breath. "Mark, do you think we're happy?" He frowned slightly. "What do you mean?" "I mean us, our marriage. Do you think we're happy?" He looked at her for a long moment, as if trying to read her. "I thought we were, aren't we?" She swallowed. "I don't know." Mark set his fork down. "Mel, where is this coming from?" She hesitated. How could she explain everything? The loneliness, the distance, the way she felt like she was living beside him instead of with him. I don't want us to wake up one day and realize we've become strangers." His expression softened. "Is that how you feel?" She nodded. For the first time in a long time, Mark really looked at her, and she saw something flicker in his eyes, maybe concern, maybe sadness, maybe the same quiet fear she had been carrying. "We can fix this," he said, reaching for her hand. She wanted to believe that. She really did. But as she laced her fingers with his, she wasn't sure if she was holding on to her husband or the memory of what they used to be. Life is full of moments where we stand at a crossroads, faced with the choice of holding on or letting go. As we grow older, we begin to understand that relationships, like time, are not infinite. They require care, effort, and sometimes painful honesty. Love does not fade overnight. It is lost in the spaces left unspoken, in the days that pass without appreciation, in the quiet resignation that things will always be as they are. But just as love can slip away, it can also be rekindled. It is not grand gestures that sustain a marriage, but the willingness to reach for each other even when the distance feels vast. For those who have walked through decades of life, the deepest lesson is this: the past cannot be undone, and the future is never certain. But the present, the choices made in this moment, are what shape our final days. Whether in marriage, friendship, or self-reflection, the question remains the same. Are we willing to nurture what truly matters before time takes the choice from us? In the end, the greatest regret is not the love we lost, but the love we never fought for. Thank you for joining us today. We'd love to hear from you. Please share in the comments one insight you gained and how you plan to apply it in your life. Your feedback is invaluable and keeps us motivated. If you found this video helpful, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. Your support enables us to continue creating content that informs and inspires. Thank you for watching, and we look forward to seeing you in the next video.